Hi, I'm Kasia. In this lesson, you can learn how to describe trends and statistics with a focus on business English use. That means you'll learn how to describe sales figures, market trends, and company successes or failures.
You'll see useful language to talk about statistics in different ways, including how to describe line graphs, proportions, and pie charts, and comparing different trends. Do you want English subtitles while watching this video? Click the CC button in the bottom right now to turn on English subtitles if you need them. On a mobile device, tap the Settings button. Now, let's look at our first topic, how to describe sales figures in different time periods.
Sales to the 18 to 35 age group increased consistently over the year. Sales rose from just under 2 million in the first quarter to a little over 2 million by the end of Q4. Sales were strongest overall to the 36 to 50 demographic, with figures improving by 5 million between Q1 and Q3. However, the most spectacular results were seen in Q4. Sales doubled from Q3, reaching a peak of 15 million. From the 55 to 65 group, results were solid, but there was only a negligible increase for the full year. Sales initially fell between Q1 and Q2, but recovered from 4 million in Q2 to 6.5 million by the end of Q4. Finally, sales to those aged 66 and up decreased steadily throughout the year. Sales fell from 8 million in the first quarter to 2 million by the end of Q4. There was a particularly pronounced decline between Q2 and Q3 when sales dropped by 3 million.
Look at a sentence. What word could you use to complete the sentence? There's more than one possible answer. Pause the video and think about it to get as many answers as you can. You could say sales increased from 150 million to 200 million.
Or you could say sales rose from 150 million to 200 million. You could also say grew, improved, or climbed. Note that you can only use improve if you're talking about something positive. All these verbs follow the same pattern. However, you can use them in other ways. Look at two sentences. Do you know the difference? Could you explain it?
Let's do this by example. If these are the figures, which is correct? Did sales increase to 1,000 or by 1,000? The correct answer is sales increased to 1,000. What about increased by? What would the numbers look like? If sales increased by 1,000, the numbers might look like this. The same rule works with other verbs you saw before: rise, grow, improve, and climb.
Look at one more sentence. How many words could you use to complete this sentence? You could say decrease. But again, there are other possibilities. Fall and drop are also common. You could also use decline, although it's rarer as a verb. You can use the same patterns you saw before. For example, you can say that something decreased from something to something. Or you can use by after these verbs.
Finally, many of these verbs can also be used as nouns. For example, there was a large increase in sales figures in the first quarter of the year. There was a steady fall in advertising revenues throughout 2019. we experienced a sudden drop in web traffic in August.
In some cases, the noun form is different, as in grow, growth, or improve, improvement. You can use these nouns in the way you just saw. For example, there was a steady growth in advertising revenues throughout 2019. Now, you should have many different ways to describe trends. Let's see how you can describe percentages and proportions.
More than half, 55%, of our sales were vehicle insurance. The second highest performer was home insurance, making up 1/5 of policies sold. Life and health insurance each comprised 10% of total sales, while travel insurance accounted for the smallest percentage of sales, at just 5%.
If you want to talk about percentages and proportions, you'll need to use different language compared to talking about trends and quantities. Look at some sentences you heard in the presentation. Can you remember the missing words? Pause the video and try to find the answers. If you want, you can also go back and review the presentation.
Ready? Let's check. To talk about proportions, you might need to talk about fractions, like in sentence 1. Do you know other words for fractions in English? You can say a third, a quarter, a fifth, and so on. Then you can add words like more than or less than to describe things more accurately. For example, less than a third of customers said they would recommend us to a friend. More than 3/4 of purchases were through our website.
You might also need verbs like comprise or account for. A similar verb is make up. You heard the second highest performer was home insurance, making up 1/5 of policies sold. You can use these verbs with percentages or fractions. For example, you can say, clothing sales accounted for 80% of our revenue last year. Or you could say, clothing sales accounted for 4/5 of our revenue last year.
Again, you can add a modifier like more than or approximately if you need to. For example, clothing sales accounted for approximately 4/5 of our revenue last year. Or, clothing sales accounted for just under 4/5 of our revenue last year. In this way, you can describe a wide range of figures as precisely as you need to. Let's move on to our next point, describing rates of change.
In Europe, the number of new customers fluctuated between 2017 and 2020, but overall numbers remained constant, with figures for 2020 very close to those for the beginning of the period. In Asia, numbers increased in every year, but between 2019 and 2020, there was a dramatic rise, reaching a peak of 30 million new customers gained in 2020. Customer acquisition in the Americas saw steady growth, with numbers rising by around 5 million each year. In the Middle East and North Africa, the number of new customers collapsed between 2017 and 2018, reaching a low point of just 500,000 in 2018. Customer acquisition figures then leveled off, with only small fluctuations over the remaining period.
Let's look at some language you saw in the presentation. Look at the highlighted words. Imagine that you want to explain what they mean to a colleague who hasn't seen them before. how would you explain the words in English? Think about it. If a figure fluctuates, it moves up and down, but the overall change is small. Here it means that the number increased and decreased in different years, but that number in 2020 was close to the number for 2017.
A dramatic rise means a really large sudden increase. Dramatic is a strong word, so don't overuse it. Save it for exceptional cases. If you want other words to describe a large increase, you could say a significant rise, a considerable rise, or a large rise. Remember that increase can also be used as a noun, so you can say a dramatic rise or a dramatic increase. You can say a significant rise or a significant increase, and so on.
Steady growth means that something increases at a constant rate over a period of time. You can also say gradual growth or continuous growth with a similar meaning.
Finally, in sentence 4, collapse means to decrease by a large amount in a short time. Collapse has the meaning of something negative or destructive. Generally, if something collapses, then it doesn't exist anymore. Collapse can be a verb or a noun. You can use it as a noun like this. After the collapse of the company, thousands were made redundant. Now, let's look at our final point.
2020 was a strong year for our vehicle insurance arm. In fact, in the second half of the year, sales hit their highest levels ever, which made a significant contribution to our record profits for the year. The home insurance division also did well, with a solid performance throughout 2020. Although life insurance constituted a small proportion of our total, sales nonetheless outperformed expectations, and we're hoping to build on that growth in 2021. On the other hand, our health insurance division had a disappointing year, with sales falling well below expectations. Challenging market conditions led to a significant increase in customer acquisition costs, meaning that the profitability was also negatively impacted. Sales of travel insurance were also poor, although broadly in line with predictions.
Look at some sentences from the presentation relating to a strong sales performance. Can you remember or guess the missing words? Pause the video and try to find your answers. Let's take a look. Sales figures can be strong if they're better than expected. You can also use general words like good or excellent.
In sentence 2, you can also say reached. If sales hit their highest levels ever, then you could also say you set a new record. You set a new record when you reach a level which is better than you ever have in the past.
In sentence 3, outperform means to perform better than expected. The opposite verb is underperform. So if figures are worse than expected, you could say that a department or a company underperformed. What if sales were poor? Look at 3 more sentences. Can you remember the missing words? You know what to do. Pause the video and get your answers now.
Could you remember? Let's look together. If sales are worse than you expected, you could also describe them as weak, poor, or just bad. In sentence 2, challenging means something like difficult. Challenging market conditions means that doing business and making sales is harder than it normally is. Don't forget, The presentations contain many more examples of language you can use to describe market trends and company performance. Review them several times and find words and phrases which you can use in your work. Thanks for watching.
See you next time!